back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. Yes, it is still baseball season. Yes, it is post-Memorial Day. And yes, the Baltimore Orioles are in last place. Luke Jones has been, dare I say, suffering this. And, someone asked me the other day, how does Luke feel about all of this? And, going out to the ballpark on Memorial Day, and I know you had a nice weekend with your family, and no one's going to the games but you. I live down here. I live 2 blocks away, and I see that no one's going to the ball games. And I found myself with the Detroit Tigers team bus walking around the city, and I realized it could have been the Orioles team bus because, honest to God, if Alberto, Villar, Nunez, Severino, Broxton, Wilkerson, Martin, Australian Armstrong walked into my office right now, Luke, and those are all the names of the players on Monday. I literally, Mancini, I would get, VR, maybe, the rest, maybe Dwight Smith, maybe because he looks a little bit like his pop, but I don't know. The rest of these guys, I guess I would get Hyde. I don't really know any of the coaches, so unless Sam Perlazzo's getting off the bus, I would have a hard time with that. It is really an incredible thing as we enter June, Luke, how anonymous these cats are amidst the last placeness of it all,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how incredible it is because that's kind of the deal when you're rebuilding. I mean, the Detroit Tigers, who the Orioles are hosting this week, are in a very similar position. Miguel Cabrera, Nicholas Castellanos, and a couple other guys here and there, but the rest of those names are anonymous. And, they've struggled to a degree, maybe not the same as the Orioles, but very similar. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast.
Well, bad is bad. 300, 400, doesn't matter what. You're either a contender or you're nothing. And at this point, that's what baseball is, and this is what incompetence looks like. When you have to break it all down and you have to build it up from nothing, this is what you're stuck with, and this is the beginning of, I don't know where the end of the black hole is, but nobody looks at these players and says, it feels like, and I said this to you before we began the segment, and I'll let you go off on it, it feels a little bit like we're watching the Norfolk team here, and no one's married to anybody, and it's this collection of quad A players that is trying hard, and some of them may make a play, and some of them lose a fly ball in the sun, and, poor Brian Roberts has to make an excuse for him. I'm trying to watch it. I really, really am. But it's really, really difficult. And you're out there, and you're immersed in it. So you've dedicated 8 hours some days to doing this, 3 days, 4 days a week. Where are you in all this? What are you making of all this, Luke?
Well, I'm not surprised by it. You're talking about a team that lost 115 games last year when it was kind of sort of trying to win the first half of the season. So, for their record to be where it is, I'm not terribly surprised by that. I think the last 2 to 3 weeks have been a little more concerning on the front of not just losing games, but the way they've lost games. You and I talked about this quite a bit over the first month, the first 5-6 weeks of the season. I thought they were, for the most part, playing crisp baseball. It's just there's a talent deficiency. There's just no way around that when you look at who they're playing on a nightly basis. And, other than a stray occasion when they're playing someone like the Tigers, for example, they're not the most they're never the most talented team on the field, or they're not even equal in talent. So you're always dealing with that.
And that's before the bullpen gets involved, right? Literally,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. But I think the last couple of weeks it's been a little more concerning on the front of you've seen more lapses in focus, you've seen more lapses in the field. I don't think it's an effort thing. I really don't. But you're still seeing lots of inexcusable kind of mistakes being made. An outfielder throwing to the wrong base and then causing someone else to move up in the scoring position. You're seeing more stuff like that. You're seeing someone call off a teammate and then they drop a pop-up. The bad news bears kind of stuff. There was some of that early in the season. And look, they were losing games from the second week on. They had the nice 4-1 start, and that was a pleasant surprise. And they've lost at a very high clip since then. But the eyeball test has waned a little bit more. And then to the point that you made a moment ago, this bullpen, this pitching staff in general has just been so bad. The other aspects of the team aren't good. The offensive numbers aren't impressive. You go down the list, there are very few things you can point to as saying, that's good or that's a strength or anything like that. but the pitching especially has just been just awful, and historically awful from a home runs allowed standpoint. So, from that standpoint, I mean, to me, it's always at this point, and I said this at the beginning of the season when we talked about all these new guys that were here, it's really trying to survey and say, who has a chance to stick around for a few years? And, you go down the lineup.
Well, honestly, the answer is probably nobody, because if they're that good, they're trade bait. And one of the problems with the Givens in these guys is that they haven't been good enough to deal out, right? I mean, we'd love to make a market for 3 or 4 of these guys between now and the end of July, right?
Right, and I lump that into part of the equation as well. Who here is looking like they could stick around for a few years or get dealt and bring some assets of value back? And it's a short list. I think there have been some positives. We've talked about Dwight Smith Jr., for example, although he's cooled off some here of late. I think one guy that you and I haven't talked about at all, but has continued to hit at a surprising level, is Pedro Severino. Look at his numbers for a catcher. He's hit pretty well. Now, do I think he's going to be a starting caliber catcher moving forward? No, and I don't think his production does anything to change your opinion on the Orioles likely drafting Adley Rutschman, the catcher from Oregon State, or anything crazy like that. But could Pedro Severino be a backup catcher of value? Sure. He looks like he could be that kind of guy. I mean, Mancini and VR are givens in terms of guys that you're going to either value or deal at some point here, whether it's this deadline or sometime in the not-too-distant future. Renato Nunez he's on pace to hit 39 home runs right now. He is as streaky as anyone I can remember, other than probably Mark Reynolds, going back 6-7 years ago. So
fits right into that softball motif we've had around here the last couple of years, right?
Yeah, he's when he's hot, he swings the bat as well as anyone. When he's not, he really, really struggles. So on the position player side, that's what you have. Stevie Wilkerson's been a nice little story for them, playing the outfield. Does he have trade value? No. Is he someone who could be a useful utility player? Sure. I'm not going to dismiss that possibility. But of all the names I just mentioned, how many of those guys are really moving the meter in terms of making you better or fetching something of real value on the trade market? You go back to what I said, the 2 guys that are givens in this equation. It's Mancini and Jonathan VR from a position player standpoint. The bad news is you kind of look at some of the other pieces that you were potentially looking at going into the season. Michael Givens has been an absolute disaster over the last 10 days, to the point where Brendan Hyde's talked about taking him out of the closer role, and we've seen him blow some saves and have some issues with control and just not getting the job done. It's been painful to see, and he's someone that, if you asked me going into the season who might be their most valuable trade chip, I might have said Michael Givens potentially. But when you have an ERA where he is right now, that's not going to be the case. So you hope he can get back on track. His ERA is around 5.5 right now. There's still 2 months to go until the trade deadline, so it's not as though you have to deal him tomorrow. But you go down the list. You talk about him. When they signed Straley, there was hope that they could flip him. That's clearly not going to happen. He's in the bullpen now. So it certainly hasn't gone to plan. It's gone to plan, I think, in terms of expectations from a win-loss standpoint. Not that, I think just anyone being realistic, you can't be surprised by that, but it has been disappointing from the front of who are the 4 or 5 guys they might be able to deal. Mancini, check. VR, check. But on the pitching side, Michael Givens, no. Andrew Kashner, maybe. He has a 4.5 ERA. Can you move him? Probably. Are you going to get anything of significance? No. Dylan Bundy, same thing for him. So on that front, it definitely hasn't gone to plan. But again, anyone who's sitting here going into the month of June surprised by what we've seen from the Orioles, I just don't know what your expectations were. I mean, this is what it was going to be. Rebuilding is not fun. That's why guys like me were talking about reloading in 2015 and selling in 2017 and the off season of going into 2018. Why? Because my thought on that was you would prevent a rebuild that is this drastic, this painful, probably this extensive, this
Well, I mean, if you
long.
go back and look, Dan Connolly does this on a daily basis, and other people where you go back a little bit in time and say, if this, then that. And if it's not the writers doing it, it's every fan saying,
Sure.
if Nelson Cruz and not Nick Markakis, if it's Machado and not Chris Davis, if they just would have gone with the idea that signing Trumbo would have been the replacement for Davis, if they would have bought an arm, or maybe they would have given Gonzalez another chance, or given Wei and Chen the money instead of, there's a million things they could have done over the last 5 years with their money. Giving it to Chris Davis was the worst thing, and dealing off Kevin Gausman and Manny Machado and their real assets, real Major League Baseball players, for bags of beans, and allowing Duquette to do that. This whole thing's a cluster. I mean, the whole thing's this is why when I see John Angelos in a tent at the Preakness, I don't even know where to begin. You know what I mean? Like, would I begin with my press pass, or would I begin with the lies, or would I begin with the lack of competence? Would I begin with the city or Baltimore positive? It certainly wouldn't begin with Brandon Hyde or the bullpen right now, or what's wrong with Dan Straley. You know what I mean? Like, I can't even legitimately have a conversation with anyone about what's going on now as to how it relates to what happened over the last 5 years or 10 years or 25 years, as to how we have 3,500 people running around the ballpark on Memorial Day. It's bizarre to me. All of it's bizarre, but I don't know where the bottom is, kind of like for the city, where, like, what's going to fix it? I guess good baseball players are going to fix it, and that's why they're talking to kids with Delmarva Shorebirds hats on in the pregame show, because you and I are going to spend most of the summer talking about the pipeline, because we can't sit here with a straight face and talk about a baseball team that's playing 300 ball that's just parading different players in, trying to find somebody to get the next guy out, literally. I mean, that's what it feels like to me.
Well, I could talk about the Orioles with a straight face, but I know that they're
not this
a team that's
season.
on pace to win 51 games.
Not as a going concern that last night's game matters or tomorrow's game matters in relation to the season. So that's why I'm saying.
But that was also the case in 1988. That was the case in 1991.
For far too long, it's been the case.
You're going to have these, but you are going to have these periods of time. But to the point that you made, Mike Elias can't control what happened 5 years ago.
No doubt about it.
That's just the reality, and that's where you look at the timeline moving forward, and if you want to state a case for being more optimistic from a baseball front, now, we can certainly debate how this team is marketed, and we've talked about that. You've seen some more ticket deals that they've introduced the last couple weeks. Problem is, those should have been proactive measures, not reactive measures. But that point aside, from a baseball standpoint, I do have more optimism about what they're doing. What I'm hearing about as far as things that they're doing in the minor leagues with, chips in bats and, the Edgertronic cameras and things of that nature. They're basically moving into the 21st century. They're getting on board with what other teams are doing. Now, does that give you an advantage? No, but it puts you on a more level playing field with these other teams in terms of developing players, in terms of evaluating players, and I think you're already in the minor leagues starting to see some of the fruits of that. So as much as you can kind of look at the last 5 to 6 years, and look, let's be very clear about this. As much as we're now going to look at the previous regime and see where this thing was left and reduced to rubble, they did win a good bit from 2012 through 2016, more than at any other point, dare I say, in my lifetime, born in 1983. So I don't want to completely disparage them, but at the same time, my point, my issue from going back as far as 2015 was the lack of any semblance of concern for the future, and that's where you get into where the Orioles stand right now. I mean, teams go through rebuilds. It's a matter of what degree does it have to go to, and when you're talking about a team that was actually kind of sort of trying to win at the start of last year, and then they go out and lose 115 games, well, it tells you have a really long way to go as an organization. So, yeah, on a night-to-night basis, do the games matter in terms of wins and losses? No. Do they matter, though, in terms of trying to develop some players on this roster to either trade or to have as a piece for, even if it's not when they're going to contend, but you still need to play games over the next few years. So can you have some guys that steady the ship, so to speak, guys that can be a nice influence? We've talked a lot about Trey Mancini, but some of the other guys on this team, like an Andrew Kashner, being a presence for the rest of the rotation. Doesn't mean that they're doing a good job, not necessarily, but you still have to go through it, and you're still hoping that you can develop something out of this current group. And there are going to be more guys on the way. We're going to see other guys join this team. Maybe not a ton of guys this year, but I think we'll see a few. And certainly there'll be more next year and the year after that. So it's all encompassing. I mean, it's there as much as you want to just make it about wins and losses, and you look at the record and you mock it. And look, I mean, I'm out there every night. There are plenty of nights where it's incredibly difficult to watch. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. At the same time, you do get some scenarios where some guys have some unexpected success, like a John Means, for example. We've talked about Dwight Smith. And when you're looking at it through that lens, you can take a little bit of optimism away from that. Doesn't mean that it's the end-all, be-all, but you hope to get something out of these games that you're losing over and over and over. So I guess my big picture view is, I can't point to too many things and say, wow, that's been a major success in terms of guys playing really well or guys that are positioning themselves to be moved at the deadline and to get more prospects. But I can't say that anything I've seen has been that shocking other than just the sheer volume of home runs they've given up when you're talking about a team on pace to shatter the major league record for home runs allowed. I didn't anticipate that, but to sit here and say that I didn't anticipate the Orioles being on pace to lose over 100 games, I predicted that. I mean, their pace has been a little bit worse than what I forecasted, but I mean, this is what it is, and that's why I said throughout the offseason, as much as people, whenever you're in a position like the Orioles were in the last couple of years, people almost romance the idea of rebuilding. They say, "Oh, young players, it's going to be fun, and these guys are going to have energy." And
no, it's going to look like Major League, is what it's going to look like.
And look, these. I think there are very few instances this year where I would really question any effort. The Machado jogging down the first baseline type moment. Very few times I've seen something like that from players. Now, I've seen some head-scratching, blunders in terms of just maybe making a mental mistake. We've seen plenty of that, but these kids play hard. I think they're hey, these guys are trying to stay in the majors. So I'm not being disparaging in that way, but this isn't fun.
No, there's no doubt about it.
When you're 20 games under 500 on Memorial Day, that's not fun. But it's not unexpected. And, again, this is why people like me, and believe me, I'm not patting myself on the back. There are lots of people who felt this way. When you looked at the 2015 trade deadline and wanted the Orioles to deal Wei-Yin Chen or deal Chris Davis or deal Darren O'Day, and they didn't. And in the case of Davis and O'Day, they re-signed those guys even. And, okay, yeah, they made a wild card in 2016. So maybe if they deal those guys the previous deadline, that doesn't happen. But also take a look that year. Some of the guys they re-signed, like Davis and O'Day, didn't really have a big part in that wild card team. So, who knows if that still might have happened. But the point is, there was just nothing done in terms of the future. There was nothing being done in terms of having any long-term vision. And part of that was, hey, Dan Duquette and Buck Showalter, their contracts expired after 2018. Why would they be invested beyond then? So, So you're still dealing with the fallout from there, and I think Mike Elias has done everything you could have reasonably asked to this point, understanding that they weren't going to waste assets on the major league club at this point in time because of the point you made. What's the difference between being 10 under 500 compared to 20 under 500 right now? I don't think people are engaged in either option. So, from that standpoint, they're pumping more into player development, technology. They're doing way more in the international market. Mike Elias said last week, and I know the bar is incredibly low, but he said this is going to be their biggest international signing period the Orioles have ever had. It's a start. I don't expect them to be number one in baseball because, one, they need to build the relationships and infrastructure down there, and two, they're already behind, so to speak, in terms of the big-time international prospects. It's kind of like college recruiting in the Dominican and what have you. So, but they're going to sign guys, and it's going to be way more of an effort than we've seen at any point, at least that I can ever recall, for the Orioles in the international market. But these are things that aren't going to bear fruits overnight. I mean, the Orioles are at a point right now where they're planting seeds, and not everything's going to sprout, not everything's going to blossom. That's the nature of the beast with the minor leagues and a farm system and trying to build a talent pipeline. But if you commit enough resources to that and you have good people, and I think if you look at their minor league pitching right now, for example, they have guys at every level doing a really, really nice job. And some of these guys are not just putting up numbers, but they're legitimate prospects. Guys like Grayson Rodriguez and D.L. Hall and Blaine Knight. And Keegan Aiken's done a nice job at AAA. It looks like he is on the cusp of being called up here probably over the next couple months. So the cupboard's not entirely bare, but it's not nearly full enough. And that's where Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal and the brass is, that's where their attention is focused right now. And another big part of that's going to be the draft next week, of course. So,
well, we'll do a big preview on that. Luke Jones is here.
Steps, right.
Let me just intervene here and reset everything. We're talking some Orioles baseball. We're going to get some Ravens in here this week as well. Post-Memorial Day with Last Place Baseball. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by our friends at State Fair. We're going to be at Catonsville doing another Baltimore Positive Chat. You've seen that up at WNST.net. Hopefully you're following us out on social media as well. Freeman Rabowski, president of UMBC. My first time to sit with him is at State Fair on Thursday. We're going to do that at 9 a.m. Hope to see you there on May 30th. Also, our friends at Charles Newsonoff and Sons in Parkville. This week, 50% off the wedding band. My wife got her band redone. Sydney did that over there, so go see Sydney in Parkville. He'll be here all week. Full Circle. We trust Dave up at Full Circle Tire and Auto in Bel Air with our auto repair. I think he was doing the Nasty Van back in the day. He's there with the 1995 oil change. Learn more about all they're doing up there at North Fountain Green Road in Bel Air at 410-676. Cars. Got all sorts of sponsors here. New sponsors in Arthur County. Big shout out to Steve and everybody up at Adams Extreme Motorsports. We had him on last week. They're doing some bands up there, so we're looking forward to being a part of that. Johnny D's back with us after all these years. I'm going to be eating a shrimp salad over there later on in the week, so if you see Johnny D in the Hideaway in the lounge in Parkville, give him some love. And, of course, Icy Delights. No problem there. I'll be getting some delicious shaved ice in Essex, Dundalk, and Highlandtown. My wife wanted me to walk to Highlandtown on Memorial Day for a egg custard icy delight. I said, we'll get in the car on Tuesday and do it. And, of course, it's not 92 degrees anymore. Luke Jones here. Luke, I wanted to backtrack on a bunch of stuff here. First off, the draft's next week, and I want to make sure that's going to be the biggest thing that happens around here. And we're talking about this kid Rutschman, but I want to talk about the other kids and maybe the way these guys are viewing the draft, and we can do that later in the week. But something fascinating happened to me with these Houston guys running the Orioles now, and Astro Ball, and seeing no one at the ballpark anymore, right? Like that's the obvious that no one's going to the games, and you witness that more than anyone else. And the residue of success and what happens when you build something with a little bit of depth, right? The Astros now are still playing at a nice clip, and they've made some additions and some subtractions, and they've hurt some feelings of some Dallas Keuchels and, amongst other things, right? And obviously Elias and Mejdal being here is another part of guys spreading out and not being there anymore. But I watched them play a game on maybe it was Sunday, maybe Saturday, Sunday, Monday over the weekend. And the ballpark's packed, and they're playing, and it's a big game, or maybe the Red Sox, whatever it was. And I see people in the stands, and then I see Kansas City, and I think, well, they won. You and I were out there amidst all that, and there was this big blue wave and billion people at their parade, and it wasn't that long ago. And it looks more like the Orioles look right now, right? And I look up at the San Francisco Giants coming to Baltimore this weekend, and if we were out there, you would see what 11,000 looks like out there when they're 20 games under 500, right? Like, so Tampa Bay would be the greatest example where we all witnessed them get very, very good for a sustained period of time and have it really have no impact on the franchise from a ticket sales, marketing, skyboxes. Every Joe Madden got off of that ship. And the Orioles, the aftermath of the winning is the thing that concerns me the most, Luke, because they have built zero goodwill. They went through this winning period where they didn't get people like me and Dennis Colatzos and other people really back and feeling like there's competence and that there's confidence in the competence. And I know you have a different level of confidence because of Sig Mejdal and Mike Elias, and so does Moeller. I still see John Angelos walking around like a lost puppy dog at a tent at the Preakness and think, that guy's running the place, and that guy's running the place. And the guy that they brought in last year to run the place ran from the place, week after opening day, and they can't find anybody to run their business. And they could talk about baseball and chips and bats and all of that stuff 5 years down the line. I'm wondering about the wellness of the franchise, given the underneath side of some of the soft underbellies of the Kansas City Royals and the Tampa Rays. And I'm really wondering what happens in Houston in the aftermath. What's Houston look like 4 years from now if they go back into a hole and they're just a 75 and 92 team or what, just a team that's there when this run is over with in the way that the Royals run is way over with, right? That these franchises really go off a cliff to some degree if they're not the Cardinals or the Red Sox or the Cubs, and they have this ridiculously deep foundation of fans, that doesn't exist. And the NFL has the same issue with the Jacksonville Jaguars and, these lesser, the Cincinnati Bengals, the lesser-rung franchises. And I guess sports will always have that. But for the Orioles to have become one of those before my very eyes, it's just such a tragedy, Luke. I mean, having watched the ballpark get built on a nightly basis, living downtown, watching the tumbleweed blow through the city as I do Baltimore Positive. Really, Baltimore Positive is Free the Birds the second time around, I think, 13 years later, because it's difficult for me to watch the city in decay like this and watch the franchise in this way. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, the point you just made hit on it, though. I mean, this is everywhere other than you're talking about maybe a half dozen franchises in baseball where either because they have had so much success for so long or, and sometimes it's both, they have such a big market of people to draw from, it almost becomes fail-proof as long as you're not a 115-loss team, which the Orioles were a 115-loss team last year. They're on pace to lose, I think, 111 this year, as we get through Memorial Day.
But look at the White Sox. The White Sox have been there 100 years. This is what the White Sox have looked like the last 5 years, right? Like, I've been out in Chicago 10 years ago, a couple years after they won the World Series. And for all the depth of the White Sox and my cousin and, all the heroes and Bill Veeck and Comiskey, nobody goes. They're right on the train line. Nobody goes. And so, yeah, I mean, they're the Mets in New York when they're no good. They're the second citizen. The Mets have a deeper fan base, though, just because of where they're located and how they are.
Sure.
Maybe what the Orioles wish they had or once had before the Nationals existed, quite frankly, right? Where they sort of owned 5 states for a period of time.
Sure. But I mean, even the Mets, I mean, you look at a team like that, I mean, in that area with that many people to draw from and that many people who aren't Yankee fans still, I think they're 14th or 15th in attendance right now. I mean, that's not, for New York, that's really disappointing. But again, I think short of 6 to 8 teams, and look, I mean, we could even sit here and try to figure it out.
By the way, the Pirates are probably the mirror of the Orioles, right?
Yeah.
Like the Pirates and the Orioles both had their McCutchens and their Joneses and their players and their wins and their playoff games and their disappointments and all of that, and no one goes to Pirate games, right?
Right. I mean, their attendance is very similar to the Orioles. I mean, they're both right around 16.
Oh, the ballpark's so beautiful, and it's downtown, and it's on the river, Luke. It's a beautiful ballpark. And then you look, and you're like, well, it's $28 to sit on the roof, and the beer's $11, and if I take the kids, it's a $250 day to see the Buccos, and we're going to get a bobblehead, and they're going to play the Cardinals, and I don't know, man. I mean, there is that part of the investment of how much money it is versus what else could I do with my day, and I see that in every aspect of my life every day, with whether we're going to eat, vegetables, or whether we're going to eat soup, or whether we're going to have this. We all have decisions to make every day, and this decision to come and watch baseball games in a lot of places has become a little stale. And Manfred, they're all worried about it, but here we're witnessing the bottom of the bottom, where it feels like I don't know how they get out of this. I don't know where that 94-win team and those 6 exciting ball players, we're a long, long way away from that around here.
Yeah, but at the same time, go back and look at what attendance was in 2014. Now, was it unbelievable? No, but it was 13th in baseball. They averaged 30,000 people a game. That's. I mean, it's never going to get back to where it was in 1992. I mean, it's not that way anywhere other than, like I said...
Well, they've lost the market. If the old man could sit up in bed right now and scream, he would be screaming about, they took my market away. They took my fan. They took, that was the argument he made in 1997. And, as we've crystal balled it 22 years later, almost 15 years later since they moved the team, right? It's worked out that way. Hey, the Nationals are an interesting one, right? Like, we've talked about the Cardinals and the Red Sox and the Cubs being eternal, right? And the White Sox and the Mets and the Orioles and the Pirates and the Royals being... what have you done for me lately? The Nationals are a very interesting case study, as are the Phillies, right? Like, where they have built these giant machines, really, that need 28,000 people in the stadium, right? And, they haven't gone into the hole. Now, the Phillies went into the hole, right? And the Phillies went into the hole with the Ryan Howards and the J. Rolls and the big contracts and the Utleys and all that stuff. But they never look like this. The Phillies never look like the Phillies never looked like the Expos, as I remember it.
Sure. Well, I mean, they were bad. I mean, they were definitely bad. And guess what? They were 2 years ago. They were 24th in attendance. I mean, it is reality. People, because of what you just said, there's cost involved. There's convenience. Television is such a better product. It is really difficult to get people to go to ball games in 2019, and that is not a Baltimore thing. That is a professional sports thing, quite frankly. And I think you and I have had this conversation on the air. We've had off the air before, where I've said over and over my vision of what I think stadia is going to look like, arenas and stadiums 50 years from now.
The MLS got it right? Literally.
They are going to be glorified television studios, because I think the model's going to change, and I think so much of it, and look, I mean, the NFL, so much of it is dependent on, these multi-billion-dollar TV deals they end up getting. I mean, that's just the truth. But this, again, this goes back to, are you winning or not? Really, the exception, and you mentioned Tampa Bay, it's kind of almost unfair to mention Tampa Bay in this equation, because they've never drawn, even when they've been really good. I mean, they're really good now, and they're 29th in attendance. Their attendance they've averaged about 2,000 fewer fans per game than the Orioles for announced numbers. So even when they're a first-place caliber, playoff caliber club, they never draw. The Marlins have been very similar, but we also know that there was some very much shenanigans that went into that place being built in the first place. So, but beyond those two, I think you look at so many of these teams, and they're so similar. Cleveland's another example. I mean, the Indians have been to the World Series recently. They've been to the playoffs. But guess what? They had a lackluster offseason where they didn't spend, and they got criticism. Very similar to where the Orioles were, say, post-2014 going into 15.
And the Browns are going to win the Super Bowl. Point that out. Let's make sure we point that out.
And Cleveland's 24th in attendance. So, I mean, this happens so many places now, and beyond the Dodgers, and look at the Dodgers. They've been the World Series back-to-back years. St. Louis, who has just been such an incredible baseball market for the last 20 years. The Yankees, the Cubs. I mean, you go down the list. The Angels, because I think because of market size, certainly not because they've played well. But, these teams, Boston, of course, these are the teams that draw really, really well. But for the most part, they're huge markets, and they're teams that have been successful, in some cases extremely successful. Beyond that, it is so dependent on where are you in the standings. It's just, and to the point you made as far as cost, we've talked about this. The Orioles, compared to a lot of teams in Major League Baseball, have been an affordable product, but that doesn't mean it's cheap. You still rank it 1 through 30, and even if you're in the bottom 10 and you're among the 10 cheapest, that doesn't mean it's cheap. So it is an investment, and when you are a team rebuilding very clearly, very painfully like the Orioles, it's hard to expect anyone to go to the ballpark. That's why I said, to me, there were so many missed opportunities in the offseason to not have a ticket package ready to go the day they hired Brandon Hyde and have the bells and whistles of that. Now, they've added some stuff here and there. I know they added a 4-pack where you buy tickets for 3 games, you get a 4th one free. They're doing even later this week, they're doing a halfway to Black Friday ticket deal for the opener of the Giants series. Those are things that should have been done back in February and March, not now. So
again, it goes back to the guy I ran into in the tent, and I had no idea even where to begin, so I didn't begin. Literally.
So as much as I have optimism about the baseball side of things, even though there's no guarantee that this is all going to work. There's never a guarantee. For every scenario like the Astros, there is a couple teams that just kind of find themselves where the Orioles were from 98 through 2011, because either you don't execute it well or you don't let the people in place, you don't give them the proper time to see it through, and then you keep resetting, and you bring in a new GM every 3 years. We've seen this. We see this in the NFL. We've seen it in baseball. So there's no guarantee, but I do have confidence in that. But to your point, there are a lot of other issues here that are some unique to this city, going back to the unrest and tourism and declining population and many things you're covering in Baltimore positive. But there are other issues that are at work here that are not unique to Baltimore that the Orioles are dealing with. So it's definitely it's a challenge, and there are certainly things to be concerned about. And even if you're not going to talk about the lease, and trying to figure out what the stadium, what the stadium lease, the stadium authority, how that will all shake out.
I'm trying to figure who's going to own the team, right? Like literally.
Well, and that's my point. Even if we're going to say, okay, the Orioles aren't going anywhere. Even if we're going to just make that assumption right now, how viable will it be? How fruitful will it be? How much of an asset will it be for the city? How successful will the baseball team be? What will attendance look like if they are back to winning 90 games, say, in 2023? There are a lot of questions, a lot of unknowns, and a lot of work to be done on the baseball front, on the business front for the Orioles, and certainly much bigger issues that this city certainly needs to address that go far beyond the insignificance of baseball. But there is an importance to it that you want to see this thing righted in the end. But a lot of work to be done between now and whenever that time comes. And again, lots of issues that the Orioles can control, but plenty that are out of their control that are going to impact this as well.
Adley Rutschman will be here to save us next Monday. We'll be here to talk about that. If not him, Bobby Witt will have added. Luke Jones can be found, Luke, at WNST.net. And, of course, Baltimore Luke out on the Twitter thing. Reminder, on Thursday, we're going to be at State Fair in Catonsville with the good Dr. Freeman Rabowski. This is going to be a phenomenal conversation. Our Baltimore Positive Initiative out there. Damien O'Doherty on the air. You heard Malia Cromer, our Goucher pollster, as well as Barbara Mikulski and Dutch Rupersberger. Plenty of stuff ahead Head. We've booked Ben Jealous. We've booked all sorts of stuff for the summer. We'll be telling you more about that at Baltimore Positive. Reminder, Curio Wellness Center, the holistic spa with the top-of-the-line products and experience pros. I've got the O of Curio on my lid here. Not just committed to cannabis education and ways to feel better, but looking for all of the tools that contribute to your wellness. That's Curio Wellness. Learn more at the CurioWellness.com about the Curio Way. And stop up and see him in Timonium and York Road as well. Hammer Nails. I got my hair cut. Even Peter DeLutis liked my haircut. So I got to have faith. That's what you got to have. Hammer Nails in Owings Mills up in the town center. The Man Cave Nirvana. Manicure, pedicure, adult beverages, although I did not partake. A hot towel, I did partake. The shave and relax. All of that's part of what they do at Hammer and Nails. Go see them up in Owings Mills. Also, the Modell Lyric coming down the line. Bill Maher next week. JoJo Siwa around the corner. I'm looking forward to the Pride and Joy musical of Marvin Gaye later on in the month. We've been playing that Johnny Lang commercial a little bit as well. Diana Ross on June 30th. Always magic at the Modell Lyric. Learn more at modell-lyric.com. And Lee Tessier, selling my condo, selling your home, helping you find your dream home. That's what they do with the Lee Tessier team. You can learn more at leetessier.com. See him up in Harford County. I see him and his family having fun with the Lee Tessier Mobile as well. We'll have Lee on here a little later on in the month talking about the state of real estate and Baltimore Positive as well. Plenty of Orioles, plenty of Ravens, getting ready for Adley Rutschman, doing some summer cleaning around here as well, and putting together some Hall of Fame plans for the summer around Mike Messina and Ed Reed. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 at WNST Towson, Baltimore. Make sure you're getting our morning newspaper delivered to your email inbox. All that brought to you by our friends at Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. And if there's any breaking news, like Chris Davis going off on they don't call it the DL anymore. They have new terminology for all this. So when Luke sends these things out, they are the IL. So I have my WNST tech service, and as you can see, it's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard, and Dennis Kolatzis will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home with the SSV on WNST. I'm on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Snapchat and Instagram and streaming live anywhere you are. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.